Napalm emerged from a dramatic shift in US strategy during the Second World War. In the 1930s, various air forces around the world developed the doctrine of precision strategic bombing, wherein heavy bomber aircraft would be used to carry out precision, high-altitude airstrikes on key enemy infrastructure like factories, power plants, and railways. This would effectively cripple the enemy's ability to wage war, bringing the conflict to a swift and decisive end. Military planners were confident that precision bombing would make wars cleaner, faster, and more humane, eliminating altogether the need for armies to meet on the battlefield. The outbreak of the Second World War, however, revealed this strategy to be fatally flawed. At the time precision bombing doctrine was developed, military strategists assumed that the new generation of all-metal monoplane bombers would be able to outrun and outclimb anything the enemy could throw at them, and that any remaining threats could easily be neutralized by arming the bombers with an array of defensive machine guns. Thus, it was believed bombers would be able to attack their targets with near impunity, inspiring the not at all hubristic motto, "The bomber will always get through." By 1939, however, fighter and anti-aircraft artillery technology had advanced sufficiently that these once seemingly untouchable bombers were now sitting ducks, with the first British daylight raids against Nazi-occupied Europe suffering horrific casualties. In response, the British switched to a strategy of bombing at night. While this was effective at protecting bombers from enemy aerial defenses, it also made it nearly impossible for bombardiers to accurately identify features on the ground, resulting in most bombs landing kilometers away from their intended targets. Realizing that their bombers were only useful against city-sized targets, the British once again switched tactics and developed the controversial doctrine of area bombing. Area bombing effectively obliterated the distinction between combatants and civilians, which had defined previous wars. Rather than striking specific military targets, bombers would now target entire cities and towns. By destroying the homes of factory workers, the logic went, the enemy's ability to produce war material could be crippled. Furthermore, repeated bombing would eventually break civilians' will to fight, causing them to rise up against their government and sue for peace. As such widespread destruction could not easily be inflicted using conventional explosives, the British took to using incendiary weapons to set cities ablaze. In a procedure that the Royal Air Force perfected to a near science, aircraft called Pathfinders used precision navigation equipment to drop flares onto the middle of a target city, marking the drop point for the following bomber stream. The first wave of bombers would then drop heavy explosive charges called blockbusters to blow the roofs off buildings, allowing incendiary bombs dropped by subsequent planes to penetrate into the building's flammable interiors. This strategy was used to devastating effect in July 1943 during Operation Gomorrah on the German city of Hamburg. A combination of firebombing tactics and unusually dry weather led to the formation of a firestorm, a 460-meter-tall vortex of flame that generated 45-kilometer-per-hour winds, sucking the air out of air raid shelters and sweeping citizens off their feet and into the inferno. By the time the raid was over, 60% of the city had been destroyed and 40,000 civilians were killed. When the United States entered the war in late 1941, they were initially horrified by British area bombing tactics and vowed to pursue precision daylight raids. Thus began the round-the-clock bombardment of Germany, with the USAAF bombing by day and the RAF by night. Soon, however, the Americans learned the same lesson the British had earlier in the war, as daylight bombing raids over heavily defended German cities suffered ever-mounting losses. Eventually, the USAAF came around to the doctrine of area bombing and began conducting joint firebombing raids alongside the British. Early in the war, US bombers carried incendiary bombs similar in design to their British counterparts, fueled by various mixtures of white phosphorus, which ignites on contact with air, magnesium, and thermite, a mixture of iron oxide and aluminium powder that burns at temperatures of 2500 degrees Celsius. In 1944, however, a new type of incendiary bomb was appearing in USAAF depots filled with a potent new substance called napalm. Napalm was invented in July 1942 by a team of Harvard University chemists led by Louis F. Pfizer. While working for the National Defense Research Committee, Chemical Weapons Division, Pfizer and his colleagues were tasked with investigating the potential military applications of divinyl acetylene, a synthetic drying oil used in paints and coatings. A series of industrial accidents had revealed that exposing this compound to oxygen could cause it to violently explode, making it a promising candidate for development into a new explosive. The team built a variety of experimental bombs filled with divinyl acetylene and set them off using small gunpowder charges. As Pfizer later noted, the results were intriguing. To quote, "We noticed also that when a viscous gel burns, it does not become fluid, but retains its viscous, sticky consistency. The experience suggested the idea of a bomb that would scatter large, burning globs of sticky gel." Now, this was not a new idea. Indeed, early in the war, both the British and Americans had produced a number of simple Molotov cocktail-style grenades consisting of glass bottles filled with gasoline, benzene, and white phosphorus. To thicken the mixture and make it stick better to a target, piecing down the entire length. Pieces of phosphorus are driven into the gel, and large burning globs are distributed evenly over a circular area about 50 yards in diameter. The U.S. Army Chemical Warfare Service tested napalm at the Edgewood Technical Arsenal in Maryland and the Dugway Proving Grounds in Utah, where exact replicas of typical German and Japanese housing was built to evaluate various aerial weapons. Napalm performed exceptionally well, demonstrating numerous advantages over older incendiary weapons. Unlike thermite, magnesium, or oil-fueled bombs, napalm scattered over a wide area and stuck firmly to the target, increasing the chances of ignition. And unlike white phosphorus, napalm could not spontaneously ignite, making it safer for ground crews to handle. Napalm also had applications outside of aerial warfare, especially in flamethrowers. While flamethrowers had been used during the First World War, the straight gasoline or diesel fuel that they used. Napalm was first developed in flamethrowers on December 15, 1943, during the US invasion of Papua New Guinea, where it proved highly effective against Japanese pillboxes and bunkers. Interestingly, when US troops entered captured bunkers, they found dead Japanese soldiers without any burns. They soon determined that the main effect of the flamethrower was to flood those bunkers with carbon monoxide gas, killing the occupants instantly. Aerial napalm bombs were first used in Europe in December 1943 in Sicily and the Pacific in 1944 during assaults on the islands of Pohnpei and Tinian. But the greatest and most devastating uses of napalm during the war would take place in 1945. On February the 14th and 15th of that year, 1,299 RAF and USAF aircraft dropped 3,900 tons of explosive incendiary bombs, including 740 tons of napalm, on the German city of Dresden. As in Hamburg 2 years earlier, the bombings ignited a ferocious firestorm which consumed 6.5 square kilometers of the city and killed an estimated 25,000 people. The bombings also ignited a storm of controversy that rages to this day over whether Dresden was a vital enough target to justify such high civilian casualties, with many arguing that the operation constituted a war crime. But even this destruction would later be dwarfed only a month later by Operation Meeting House, in which 279 USAF bombers dropped 14,000 tons of M69 napalm cluster bombs on the Japanese capital of Tokyo. Unlike in Germany, Japanese cities were mainly built of wood, allowing flames to spread out of control. The resulting firestorm destroyed nearly a quarter of the city and killed an estimated 100,000 people, more than the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined, making Operation Meeting House the single deadliest air raid in history. After the war, the use of napalm spread around. Indeed, napalm was one of the favorite weapons of the US forces in Korea, with 635,000 tons being dropped during the conflict, nearly 4 times the amount dropped on Japan during the entire Second World War. As in that war, however, the use of napalm...
Crowley claims that his second otherworldly encounter, which resulted in an even more profound influence on his work in magic, occurred at Montauk, Long Island in New York in 1918. This entity introduced himself as Lamb, which Crowley was quick to point out meant pathmaker, pathfinder, in the Tibetan language. It is from this word that Lam-as of Tibet are so called. The lamb was also the ancient symbol for Ares, Mars, as well as the resurrected god, Tammuz, Osiris, Christ, etc. Rising from the ashes, Crowley drew an effigy of Lamb.
In 1965, the Dow Company, best known for their kitchen wonder product Saran Wrap, began making napalm in mass quantities for use in the Vietnam War, raising chemical warfare to new heights of inhumanity. Yet despite its obvious cruelty, napalm proved to be a highly effective weapon. From 1963 to 1973, 388,000 tons of napalm was dropped on Vietnam, compared to 32,357 tons used during the Korean War, and a mere 16,500 tons used in World War II, covering victims both civilian and military, with a viscous magma the consistency of tar, causing burn wounds generally too great for a victim to survive. First deployed during the early years of the Vietnam War in flamethrowers and flamethrowing tanks, as the war dragged on, U.S. war planners switched to carpet bombing that could leave an area as large as 2,500 square yards engulfed in unquenchable fire. Accuracy, however, proved to be an elusive objective, causing untold casualties to civilian populations in Vietnam, at the same time creating one of the most impactful weapons in the history of psychological warfare. As media coverage of the Vietnam War intensified in the United States, napalm became a rallying point for anti-war protesters, calling for a boycott of the Dow Company beginning as early as 1966. After the fall of Saigon in 1975, 5 years later, the United Nations declared the use of napalm against concentrations of civilians a war crime, making napalm one of the worst inhumanities of chemical warfare.
Human Rights Watch say these white clouds filmed earlier in the week over the port of Gaza are white phosphorus munitions. But the Israeli military denies using them. White phosphorus is a chemical substance that ignites instantly when it comes into contact with oxygen and burns until it's all gone. It's incredibly powerful at spreading fires and is poisonous to humans. If this chemical rains down on you, it causes painful, toxic burns. And inhaling...
This in turn relating to the metals in the alchemical mystery is that the metals must die. They must be crucified. They must descend into darkness. They must pass into limbo, which is the retort, or the alchemical vessel. And here they must be caused to suffer, as in a purgatorial, which is a purging or cleansing. This is why alchemy says that you have to destroy the outward forms of things. You have to calcinate them. You have to burn them, or corrupt them, or destroy them, until nothing of the body remains but ashes. Then the living spirit within these things can unite. And compatibility, or the union, or mingling, and identification of these elements finally represents the amalgam from which the great stone of the wise is projected by alchemy.